In 1973, the small town of Wounded Knee, South Dakota, became the epicenter of a 71-day standoff that reignited the fight for Native American rights. This occupation, led by the American Indian Movement, or AIM, was both a call for justice and a cry of defiance. As Vine Deloria Jr. argued in his landmark book, Custer Died for Your Sins, an Indian Manifesto, Indigenous peoples were tired of being ignored and exploited by a government that had broken its promises for centuries. The Wounded Knee occupation of 1973 resulted in the expansion of Native American land rights and tribal autonomy, highlighting both the responsibility of the U.S. government to protect its citizens and honor treaties, as well as the responsibility of Native Americans to advocate for and defend their rights. To understand the significance of Wounded Knee, we must look back at the long history of broken treaties, stolen lands, and cultural suppression endured by Native peoples. As the documentary Incident at Oglala details, this moment was both a symptom of systemic failure and a rallying cry for the resilience of Native communities. For centuries, the United States pursued policies designed to assimilate, relocate, or eliminate Native cultures. Treaties such as the Treaty of Fort Jackson and the Treaty of Fort Laramie promised land and protection but were systematically violated, leaving Native tribes stripped of their sovereignty and dignity. The Dawes Act of 1887 and determination policies of the 1950s further devastated Native American communities, leading to the loss of millions of acres of tribal land. On the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, these injustices were aggravated by severe poverty, inadequate housing, and lack of educational opportunities.
If you went and applied for a job, you better not tell them you're Indian. You better tell them you're French or you're some Italian or some other nationality. You wouldn't get the job.
In response, the American Indian Movement, or AIM, was formed by a group of indigenous community members in 1968 to challenge systemic oppression and quickly became one of the leading forces of Native activism. The movement was also about reclaiming indigenous identity, language, and customs, which had been systematically suppressed through policies like boarding schools and relocation throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. The occupation reflects both the failures and the responsibilities of the U.S. government and the resilience of Native American communities.
My family might be all dead, and I thought massacres only happened in 1890. And it could happen now in Oglala, and this is 1975.
Tensions had been building for years between traditional Oglala Lakota people and the tribal government under Richard Wilson, who was accused of corruption. In February 1973, AIM leaders such as Dennis Banks, Russell Means, and Leonard Crow Dog joined Oglala Lakota activists to occupy Wounded Knee, which was the location of the 1890 massacre of over 250 Lakota men, women, and children. As Dennis Banks explains in his book, Ojibwa Warrior, AIM leaders and about 200 Oglala Lakota activists occupied Wounded Knee, declaring it an independent state, and demanding that the U.S. government uphold its treaties with Native Americans. Banks stated, "We wanted the government to realize that Indian people are not going to sit back anymore and allow them to break treaties and ignore our rights." Federal authorities such as the FBI and the U.S. Marshals quickly surrounded Wounded Knee, cutting off access to supplies. In March, U.S. officials attempted negotiations with AIM leaders but refused their key demands, including the removal of Chairman Richard Wilson and Senate hearings on treaty violations. According to Russell Means in where white men fear to tread, the American Indian movement ultimately agreed to end the occupation on May 8, 1973, after the government negotiators agreed to look into Native American grievances. Nothing dramatic was done against Richard Wilson, however, and a number of AIM members were subsequently indicted by the federal government. The documentary Wounded Knee from PBS notes, this was not just a physical battle, it was a symbolic fight for land rights and sovereignty. In response to the event and pressure from Native activists, the federal government started to address these issues more visibly. In 1975, Congress passed the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, which gave Indian tribes the authority to contract with the federal government to operate programs serving the tribal members and other eligible persons, and granting tribes greater control over their own affairs. As the American Indian Movement, a documentary history highlights, this marked a shift towards tribal autonomy, empowering Native communities to reclaim their governance and resources. However, the occupation highlighted the need for Native Americans to take active responsibility for preserving their cultural heritage, language, and traditions, and established a responsibility for Native communities to educate their members about treaty rights, legal processes, and strategies to hold the government accountable. While progress has been made, the struggle for Native rights remains ongoing. Wounded Knee proved that change is possible when communities unite and demand justice. Today, the spirit of Wounded Knee lives on in ongoing struggles for Native American rights. From the Dakota Access Pipeline protests to efforts to reclaim stolen lands, Native communities continue to fight for justice. As highlighted by the Native American Rights Fund, a leading advocacy group, these battles often require a deep understanding of treaty law and collaboration across tribal and political lines. This enduring fight underscores a responsibility not just to past generations, but to the future of Native sovereignty and culture. The Wounded Knee occupation of 1973 was a turning point in history of Native American rights. It resulted in the expansion of Native American land rights and tribal autonomy, highlighting both the responsibility of the U.S. government to protect its citizens and honor treaties, as well as the responsibility of Native Americans to advocate for and defend their rights. More importantly, it showcased the strength and the resilience of Native communities determined to reclaim their place in history. Today, the spirit of Wounded Knee lives on as a testament to the enduring fight for justice, sovereignty, and the protection of Native American cultures for generations to come.